G'day guys, welcome back to this R31. As we are moving forward, obviously in the last episode I got bin RB30 up into the shed, so now it's time to start pulling it down. So as you saw at the end of the last video, things like rear sump, all that I need to sort out. Luckily we've got heaps of spare RB stuff. And as Rex so confidently pointed out once he finished doing what he was doing when I got it into the shed, the engine number on this side of the block actually has an 8 stamped into it. I don't know, that might be very hard to see on camera, but it's for the last letter is A, and then underneath the letter there is an 8. I'm trying to get to that point where the camera might be able to see it. Sorry if it can't. And that is at this position on the engine block. So Rex is under the impression that this is actually an A8 factory turbo or factory VL turbo engine, which he very well may be right. Obviously, as I pointed out, the engine number on the back of the bell housing area sort of down here does not have an 8, but as much as I know about RBs, I am sure that there is probably a few of you out there that know even more than I do. So for anyone that knows whether that 8 stamped on that part of the engine number means that it is a factory VL turbo block, please let me know, because I'm under the impression that it's not. Rex seems to think that it is. At the moment, obviously out here we have no internet, no way to check, but I'm going to pull this down anyway. I'll have a look at the oil pump when I pull it off, see what oil pump it's got in it, and we'll go from there. If it is an A8, then that's bloody awesome. That just means I get the good oil pump and everything else, but if it's a Series 2, it sort of makes no difference to me, so makes no difference. Just obviously will be better if it's an A8 just because of what they are, but we'll start getting into pulling this thing down now and go through that. Alright, so just pulled the head off and inspected everything. This motor is actually ridiculously clean. It is all of the cam lobes are just absolutely perfect, and everything under this cover is in fact like ridiculously clean. Even the back side of this engine cover is, as far as someone who's pulled down quite a lot of RBs, I cannot believe how clean even the underside of this cover is. This is incredibly clean, like especially for a motor that we fished out of a bin. This is already pretty ridiculous, so we'll see how we go as it goes on. I wish I could say I'm surprised, but it is a mighty RB30, so but honestly that's pretty good as far as that goes. So we'll have a look at what the pistons and valves look like, see how it was running before she went bang. Also, I suppose just a bit of backstory with this motor for you who are chiming in now or didn't watch the episode where I sort of explained. I almost bought a turboed GQ Patrol. I didn't. A friend of mine ended up buying it. When he bought it off the people, they said they had this spare motor that they had in the Patrol beforehand that they had cooked, and it would come with the Patrol as a spare. Now, our friend who bought it at the time didn't take the motor home with him. A couple of weeks later, they call him up. They're like, "We want this motor gone. Come get it today. We're chucking it in the skip." So Rex jumps in the tonner.
They were moving house.
They were moving house. They wanted it gone. Rex jumped in the tonner, went down, fished it out of the skip bin. So this is literally a motor that came out of a GQ Patrol, hence the rear sump. It was turboed. I'm pretty sure it was running about 16 PSI in the Patrol, and it supposedly was cooked. As far as what that entails, I have no idea. I don't know if these people actually had a lot of idea about motors.
That was the problem, is that they weren't very mechanically inclined. All they could say was it was cooked or it was cactus, whatever. So when I picked it up and took it home, I did pull the rocket cover off, cut the timing belt, and pulled the head off and just turned it over by hand. Everything in the bores looked good, the pistons looked good, and it turns over smoothly. So what their cooked is, I don't know. We'll have to. I never did take the sump off because at the time I was in Brisbane and had very basic facilities and tools. So I only took the head off just to have a look if there was anything obvious, and then that was it. So I know that under there is good.
Yeah, I can't believe how clean that is.
Yeah,
It's ridiculous.
It's gonna be when we take the sump off that we'll start to see whether or not something was actually wrong.
So there you go, guys. They didn't mention it being knocky at all, so hopefully the bottom end's not that bad. Obviously, I'm putting new bearings in it anyway, but as we all know, bottom ends can get very bad very quick. But yeah, so hopefully this, as we pull it down, it's all right. So it very well could be a factory VL turbo motor for all we know. So. Righto, so we've got the head off. Not the news we wanted to see. As you can see, there is some water in these bores sitting on the pistons. However, the bores are still shiny. It doesn't seem as though they have really copped much at all. So I'm hoping this. We had a little bit of rain, like literally last week. I'm hoping this water's literally only been here for like 2 days. Is what I'm hoping for. The bores are still shiny. It doesn't look as though water has been sitting for very long. Like it's not even milky. Like, I know it's weird. It doesn't look like water's been in there for very long. The bores look really good. Aside from that, the bores, all of the, there's no lip on any of the bores. There's no obvious scores on any of the bores. They all look quite good. Looking at the head, everything looks pretty nice as well. The valves need a bit of a cleanup. On number 4, we've got this little bit of a dag. I don't know if you can see that on the camera very well. You can see it just under that valve. There's a bit of a dag there. So obviously something's gone through there at some point. That's a bit of damage. So we'll have to get id of that. That'll be a bit of a hot spot. But apart from that, clean up all these valves. That head looks quite good. There's not really any other damage. As far as like the head gasket area goes, there's nothing obvious. It all looks not too bad at all. Rex is just checking the bore size now.
Yeah, seems alright. This thing, when I first brought it out here, it actually spent the first few years under the lean-to, so it was completely out of the weather. So I can't remember how long ago Dad put all that stuff out. So
it wasn't that long ago. It was a couple of months at most.
Yeah, so hopefully
and
it looks
like I
pretty
said,
good.
we only had that rain the other week, so hopefully that's the source of all this water, and hopefully it has not been sitting here long enough to cause any damage. Alrighty, so we'll turn her over.
Oop. Yeah, that water's been in there for fuck all.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I reckon it was probably literally the other day that water got in there.
It is, look at that, there's no...
Especially like, you look at that bore, that's bare metal. If that water had been in there for any more than a week, it would have been... Look at that, that's still milky on the side there.
Yeah, have a look at this. That was the bad one.
Oh, yep.
It's coming back up now anyway. That is turning over.
Fine. Just dragging some milky stuff down the bore, but there you go, that's bottom.
There's
that's fine.
There's no edge.
That is lucky. I've got to tell you, that is more arse than class, people. The fact that we decided to do this motor now when I didn't decide to wait for another week could have made a fuckload of difference.
And then you look at the way that turns over.
Alrighty, so taking the sump off, can't see anything too wretched. The pickup is quite clean. There's no shards or anything really stuck in the pickup. No bits of metal, so nothing telltale sign of a bearing being completely destroyed. There's not really much metallic stuff in the sump that I can see, and also it doesn't look like there's been much oil in the bottom, water in the bottom end. Sorry, the bottom end actually all looks fairly clean. Had a feel around all the bottom end, can't feel anything too out of the ordinary. So just pulling this pickup off this motor and noticed something a bit interesting, which I didn't pick up before, but obviously with rear sump petrol engines, RDs, RBs and that sort of thing, the main cap on number 5, or between number 4 and 5, normally would have a thread where you can bolt the pickup to the main cap, just holds it there. This motor does not possess such a thread. This main cap is, this pickup is just sitting against the main cap there. It's only bolted by the original 2 bolts around the pickup, which would definitely suggest that this is not a petrol engine, which I sort of suspected, but is it a VLT, factory VLT motor. Alright, so another not so great discovery upon pulling the pickup off. You can see this is an O-ring for the pickup. Hold on, I'll get a light. And you can see that there is a gap in that O-ring right there, which is very bad as far as oil pressure goes. Obviously, if that's sucking air and not sucking oil, it means oil pressure is going to suffer.
See those 2 marks over that side?
Yep.
That's where that gap is. So it hasn't happened when you pull it off. It was like
It was there, yep. Alright, so at this point we are a little bit confused because we've pulled all the rods out, rods and pistons. Everything looks absolutely perfect, really. All of these bearings look fine. Obviously, when you pull them out, you're looking for things like deep scores or wear through soft metal, that sort of thing. These bearings look almost perfect, like almost brand new.
Any exposed colour?
Yeah, any like copper, brassy colour, anything like that is bad signs, but
these bearings look like they're almost brand new. They've done no work.
so yeah, and they're all, Rex checked the numbers, he reckons they're ACL standard bearings.
Standard size, so it's not reground.
So it's not reground, it's been obviously had fresh bearings very recently. It has not done much work since these bearings were put in. The rings, there's no cracked rings, there's no broken ring lens, there's no sign of anything bad there. So to be honest, at this point, these bearings, I will just literally reuse them. They look pretty much like they've only just been put in. So there's no point in really putting any new bearings in it. The other thing you're looking at when you do this sort of thing is you're making sure you check all your crank journals, making sure there's no scores, nothing bad on those. They have to be very nice and smooth. All these crank journals look fine. Literally, thus far, there is literally nothing wrong with this motor that we fished out of a bin. So
I'm pretty sure they said too that like it was a rebuilt motor and they put in the car, and then they said it was cooked, or they cooked it, and that was all the information. That's all they knew about engines. Is that was all the information they could give me.
maybe they just got it hot and they completely underestimated the power of the mighty RB30. Maybe they were just like, it's been hot, in the bin it goes.
This is no.
But the mighty RB30 was like, get me out of this bin, mate.
Yeah, this is no 2.5 litre Princess. It can handle some boiled water.
So anyway, well, at the moment I'll pull the idler, the balancer, and I'll pull the rear main and everything off, and we'll pull this crank out and have a look. But at this stage, looks like there is literally nothing wrong with this motor. And if the main bearings are the same as those bearings, as long as we'll check them and make sure the tolerances and the size is correct. But as long as they tolerance correctly, as long as the size is right, I will literally be very happy just to run all these bearings again. Probably the rings as well. We'll gap the rings, make sure they gap right, but Alright, so getting to this point, trying to get the harmonic balancer off, we have encountered what is way too much end float. I'm trying to get out of the light so you can see. That crank is moving a lot. That is far too much end float, so I'll be very interested to see how the thrust bearing on the mains is looking. So we'll pretty much work on getting this apart and see how the thrust side of the main bearings work. So.
Yeah, that's too much.
Not sure at what point the GoPro went flat during that, but obviously these little timing gears on the crank snout can be a real pain. They grow onto the crank. If you do have issue, we have found that the best way to get them off is to sort of drill through it a few times and then just split it with a cold chisel and then pull it off. Certainly seems to be. It's destructive. Obviously, you need a new timing gear when you're done, but it gets it off there. So that's what we normally do, is just wreck the timing gear and pull it off like that. But usually have a lot of trouble with those things because they're a real pain. Alrighty, so we have discovered how this engine was cooked. Yeah, it's definitely in the crank, in the mains. Yeah, the rest of the engine looks really good. Whoever rebuilt it, I don't know what happened. The end float may have been right, but whatever happened, something was pushing on the back of this crank super hard, and it has just worn the shit out of the backside of like all of the thrust surfaces. Move your, it's in the way. So you can see at the back there, it's I don't know if you can see down there, you got on the right hand side of the screen is the main of the thrust main bearing, which is fine, and on the left side you can see how far down it's worn and how that crank was just pushing forward on that surface. And you can actually see it is worn down on the crank. Every single main is worn down a little bit, so
that is so much
it is
end float.
ridiculous amounts of end float, which is obviously just from that thrust bearing being completely worn out, and from that has actually sent quite a bit of metal through a lot of the other mains. Might be hard to see there as well. I don't know, it's pretty hard to sorry guys, it is pretty hard to fucking do this with a GoPro and the magnifying glass. What I'm trying to show you is, so this is on the actual girdle, which is the other bearing surface. This is that same thrust bearing. You can see that side is sort of a bit worn, but this side over here completely worn down to hard metal. And you can see that bearing has had not a very nice life. All of these bearings will need replacing, which is actually surprising how far that's worn down. It's surprising in how good of nick the those main bearings are.
That's incredible.
The rod bearings. Sorry guys, I'm tired. I'm mixing up all my words. I'm trying not to say basically heaps, but you can see there that these bearings have not had a good time. So as good as the rest of this motor looked, the main bearings are not that great, especially the thrust bearings. So basically, we've got this crank out and it is terrible. The damage is actually quite severe. We cannot figure out what must have been so very wrong for this to happen. Potentially maybe the spigot bush was out of line and the input shaft of the box may have just been pushing on the crank. Maybe a clutch issue, but either way, this thing was not happy at all.
Yeah, like look,
have a look.
The wear in the thrust bearing is so bad that coming back to these other mains, you can see where the crank has actually contacted the block and been rubbing on.
It has
1,
damaged
2,
all the main
3, 4.
all the webbing. It's damaged all the bloody main journals on the block.
Something has to have been so wrong back in this like flywheel clutch area to put that much forward force on the crank to wear it like that. Like, that's just incredible.
It is absolutely ludicrous. I'm gonna leave it at this for tonight and sleep on it and probably assess this damage a bit more tomorrow morning in the daylight. You can actually see that this counterweight has copped a bolt at some point. That is certainly looks like an M6 thread or something similar. But yeah, that's actually easier probably without the magnifying glass, but this counterweight has definitely copped a bolt at some point. So this crank's been not had a super easy life either by the looks. All of the journals actually look alright though. I wouldn't really be too worried about that bit of damage on the counterweight. That shouldn't affect it too much at all, but apart from that, the crank doesn't look too bad. Obviously we've got the main the surfaces of the mains, which have also been damaged from pushing back on the block, the same way the block has. So this has just been pushed forward, and those shear surfaces have just been running on each other, and yeah, that's pretty severe. So I'll assess this in the morning and sign off the video in the morning. So an interesting thing to note as well is the car that I said that I was going to buy that I didn't, which this motor came out of when it was cooked, that my mate ended up buying. Literally like a few weeks after he bought it, he came to Rex and asked Rex to replace the clutch for him. So the car that this came out of had a clutch issue to start with. So basically everything sort of starts to make a little bit of sense. I believe that obviously the clutch was installed wrong, or something was up between the clutch and the gearbox, and it was just putting so much pressure on the back of this crank that it caused this sort of damage, and it also did a lot of damage to the clutch.
And you know where that second-hand clutch that I lent to him came from?
Where?
It came from the same shed I got this motor from.
Really?
It came with this motor.
Oh, right.
And then a few weeks later, he's like, the clutch is rooted, got to replace it. And I was like, well, I've got one that might fit it.
Oh, well,
and we ended up fitting it and built the new exhaust for it, and he's still got that now.
Well, there you go. It's just a little bit easier to piece stuff together when you kind of know the history of the car the motor came out of. Even just knowing that and knowing what happened after the motor came out of it makes it a lot easier to piece together the mystery. But sorry I keep doing this, but we just had another penny drop. So Rex got this motor before he had bought his R31 Skyline. When he bought his R31, it came with a knocking motor, which we swapped out for another motor that he bought. The motor that he bought didn't have a spigot bush, so what he did was flog the spigot bush out of the back of this crank. And Rex, do you want to tell the people of YouTube what that spigot bush actually looks like?
Well, now that I think about it, it looked pretty horrific.
Pretty horrific.
Yeah, I remember looking at it and I was like, Jesus Christ, this thing has it's lived a life and seen some shit. And I was trying to figure out what on earth had happened to it, but well, we might find out if we ever.
That's right, everyone. We were reusing a $6 spigot bush.
We didn't know at the time. Honestly, it was like this. It was like, yeah, midnight or whatever it is now.
Yeah.
And I was trying to get it in, and it was just like, where have we got a spigot bush? And I think it might have even been Dad who said, he was just like, what about that other motor? I was like, hey, I should go check that. And it did have one in it, but it had been butchered and it looked really ugly. It had been like mushroomed on the backside. So this whole thing is starting to sort of come together now.
Everything's really starting to add up between clutch issues and obviously this after we pulled it down, and the way the spigot bush looked. It is very much looking as though whoever put this motor in the car when they didn't align the clutch and the spigot bush properly with the input shaft, and it looks like they pretty much just jammed the input shaft at the back of the spigot bush and then tightened the box down on the bolts.
Hold it down on the bell housing bolts.
And it must have just, the input shaft must have just been pushing on the back of the spigot bush and just smashing the crank forward. And it's basically looking at the damage to the block and the crank and the bearings. It is literally the only thing that really makes sense. And obviously just talking about what's come out of this motor and everything else, it definitely does all make sense. So.
I can't see, like we talked about, I can't see a clutch being installed so wrong that it could cause that damage and still work as a clutch should.
If there was that much pressure on the clutch all the time, there would be other fucking major issues. It would not be driving. So it's the only thing that really makes sense is if that input shaft was just punching the back of the spigot bush and just forcing the crank forward.
I can't believe the poor old starter motor could turn the thing over like that. That is so much pressure.
But anyway, that's pretty much, guys. That's how we figured out the life of this poor RB. Obviously, before it was input into that car and all this happened, it looks like it had been quite well rebuilt. Whoever did it, yeah, all the bearings look good. It's got a new like bypass valve in the oil filter thing. This spline looks like everything's quite new. Like the engine, apart from this issue, looked to have been, it would have been a very healthy motor and would have lived for ages. But
and if I remember right, that was the story, is that this engine had been rebuilt and then it went into the car. It didn't last long and then it was cooked or fried, whatever you want to call it. Which, after looking at this, you can understand, like, it wouldn't have been a big end knock. It wouldn't have been RPM related. It just would have been every time they push the clutch in and out, it just would have just,
I would hate to imagine what it would have been like.
Yeah.
Alright, so for the third time now, I'll sign this video off in the morning after I've slept on it and decided what to do. Thanks, guys. Alright, so I've slept on it, and basically, I'm still a bit undecided as to what to do. As I said last night, it's not like I'm putting this engine together and putting it in a daily car that's going to be driven and in the hopes that it'll last sort of 200,000 Ks. So it's certainly going to be only small street driving and drifting. So I will really only expect this engine to last maybe 2 years or whatever, depending on how much it's driven. So that being said, I don't know how much to worry about the wear on the crank. Basically, looking at the block in the daylight and stuff, that's all going to be fine. Everything there should be fine. The bearing on the cap, on the girdle, it's not down to hasn't gone through the hard metal yet, so it's not super bad. Like you can see there, it's not super bad. There's still bearing there, hasn't done a lot of damage. Pretty much the only thing I'm really worried about is this on the main journal, on the edge. There's just, you can feel the grooves where it's worn in. Basically my options are to machine that down, in which case I'll have obviously a wider journal, which means I'll have more end play than I should, or just leave it and allow that surface just to score itself into the bearing, which will cause premature wear. But as I said, I don't know how much to worry about it. But in any case, I have to get another RB30 out because I need a front sump and pickup and stuff. So I'm going to go down and get another RB30 and bring it up, start pulling it down. So that'll be it for this episode. So keep an eye out very soon for the next episode of me pulling down the other 30 for parts. So thanks for watching, guys. As always, appreciate everyone that's watching, and I'll see you soon.